Yeah, I love the Nintendo Switch because I loved spending $60 on Nintendo controllers. Remember when Nintendo Switch Online launched in 2018? How remember when it was supposed to launch in 2017, but it got delayed a year, and then it came out in 2018, and it launched with baseball for NES? Yeah, that was worth the wait. This service has had so many ups and downs, and seems like right when something new comes out for it, people hate it. And then after a couple months, like, they start to kind of prove their worth. The baseline Nintendo Switch Online tier for 20 bones, not that bad at all now. But back when it came out, I mean, like, what? It was just NES Online, the ability to play games online, which you were able to do for, the first year and a half of the Switch's existence. And then they were like, no, now it's $20 a year. Why? Why is it $20 a year now? What are you doing differently? Nothing. They weren't doing anything differently when they started asking you to pay for it. I guess the value was coming in with the fact you can play NES games. Who wants to do that? Listen, I love the little creatures in that app there. I love retro games. I love looking back at them. But come on. I like looking at them from a historic perspective. I find it incredibly interesting and incredibly endearing to experience those old games. But I've already experienced these old games for numerous years on the past few generations of Nintendo platforms. We were able to play them again on the Wii Virtual Console, and the 3DS Virtual Console, and the Wii U Virtual Console. So this wasn't anything special, it was just kind of a given at this point. But even when they do something kind of cool with the Nintendo Switch Online service, they immediately just hit you, just bah! Because when they showed off that NES games were a part of the Nintendo Switch Online subscription, they also announced they were releasing Nintendo Entertainment System style controllers that hook onto the Nintendo Switch as Joy-Con. Like, this is so damn cool. I remember back for Club Nintendo during the Wii days, only in Japan, they released a Super Famicom style controller that plugged into the Wii. And that was amazing. That was so cool. I really wanted something like that to release in North America, but still, like, that was amazing. It's so cool to use old controllers on new systems, especially when they're kind of like re-released in this way. But then you saw the price, $60. To be fair, you got two in a package, but that's still $30 a pop. $30 for this. Yeah, that stings quite a lot. Yeah, it is wireless, and it has, like the shoulder buttons, and it snaps onto the Joy-Con rail. That's all nice, but, at the end of the day, come on, man. This is a complete novelty. Which, to be fair, I mean, they were offering it only to Nintendo Switch Online subscribers, but you still have to pay for it. So it's kind of like, these were labeled as special offers for Switch Online subscribers, but it's just like, I still have to pay for it. Why is this a benefit to having a Switch Online subscription? You might as well just make this like an Amazon.com exclusive or a Nintendo Store exclusive instead of like, oh, this is only for Switch Online subscribers. Like, piss out, man. But I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I own all of these controllers, mainly because I recently got them all, because I'm like, man, you know what? I feel like being, reckless. But yeah, I've never tried these things, and I definitely want to give them a go and talk about, like, hey, which one definitely has the most value? Something that I find really cool about pretty much any Switch controller is that they work across the system. It was so annoying that like a bunch of Wii games supported the GameCube controller, but you could only use the GameCube controller within the games. You couldn't use it across the Wii menu or anything like that. Same happened on the Wii U. Super Smash Bros. For Wii U supported the GameCube controller with the GameCube controller adapter, but you couldn't use it across the menu. You always had to use a Wii U controller to boot up the game, which was just kind of annoying. This time, on the Nintendo Switch, plugging in the GameCube controller adapter, you can control the entire system with that thing. You can play any game that supports a USB controller with the GameCube controller. It is so nice. But that extends to the Nintendo Switch Online controllers. It just depends on if these buttons work within the games you want to use them on. So as long as your game only uses the D-pad, B, A, start and select, and shoulder buttons, you can use these controllers with it. I will say the Joy-Con rails do make this feel a little funky, especially because like they're just a little too big but it does work this way, which I find kind of cool. You know, something that I do have to give Nintendo credit for during the Switch generation is the attention to detail with this kind of stuff. Like, even the fact that so many Switch games can detect what color Joy-Con you have, I think is really, really cool. And the fact that Nintendo made sure that when the NES Joy-Con are attached here, the D-pad is flipped, so then this direction, you know, works and you can use it like this. I don't think they actually expect you to use it like this, but some people might like it. Some people might like the fact that the B and A buttons are, you know, vertical like this. It's pretty interesting. The D-pad on the bottom here acts as the home button. The A button here is the capture. All 4 of these buttons here, select and start on both Joy-Con, are just the plus button. So, you know, that's pretty fun. And of course, we have no shoulder buttons here. So this isn't a super viable situation here. However, Nintendo did make sure that if you really wanted to do it, you could control the Switch like this. But hopping into the NES app, the color actually changes if it detects that you're using the NES controller. As you can see, it goes to a gray variant, which is pretty cool. And as you can see, boom, the icon appears. That's awesome. And there's also brand new sound effects that play on the menu here when you're using the controller. So it's definitely kind of a cute little Easter egg if you actually own one of these things. And yeah, this is an NES controller. It's pretty miraculous how Nintendo can still pretty much create the exact same controller they did back in the 80s. And like, this feels very substantial. It's probably the fact that it is wireless, so they have to include a battery and more components in here. However, overall, this feels pretty damn spot on. Very similar to how Nintendo made the NES Classic Edition controller feel spot on. This is pretty much the exact same controller that they used for that, which is the exact same controller they used for the NES back in the day. But just feeling one of these controllers with like brand new buttons, a brand new D-pad, all of that, it just feels good. These games definitely feel just right with this controller. It's really great to play this with an actual controller, which is something that's always been kind of like a thing in the retro game community, is the fact that like, oh, you gotta play with the original controller on the original hardware. I agree that these games are much more enjoyable played kind of in that older sense. However, I don't give a damn. This definitely feels a lot more right. This feels like this was how this game was meant to be played. However, am I gonna play it all the time with this? No, it's about convenience. It's kind of fun to watch an old movie on VHS, but are you always gonna watch it on VHS? Hell no, like that's a novelty at this point. It is easier to just play it with the controllers that you have on standby. So these are really cool little novelties. They aren't necessary by any means, but they feel really good. I love how versatile they are, how they don't just work for NES games, even though they have a very limited amount of buttons, so that's mostly what they only work with. But I love the fact that you can connect it like Joy-Cons, and you could play other games with this, like 2D Mario games and some indie releases, or just very specific games that don't use a ton of buttons. But that's where the Super Nintendo controller comes in. This was introduced a year later alongside the SNES games being introduced to Nintendo Switch Online, and this is done in a bit of a different way to the NES controllers. First up, yeah, no Joy-Con rail. It doesn't look unfinished. This just feels like a nice, substantial controller. That doesn't feel like a gimmick like these are. This just feels like, hey, this is a Super Nintendo controller for your Nintendo Switch. Well, that's what these feel like. These still kind of feel a little gimmicky with that Joy-Con rail. And they got rid of the Joy-Con rail in favor of just a simple USB-C port like any Nintendo Switch Pro controller. And having more buttons means that this controller is so much more versatile for even more games. So if the NES controller doesn't work with a game that you might be interested in playing a retro game with, the Super Nintendo controller might. Another change is that buying this does not mean you get 2 in the bundle. It's not $60 like the NES controllers are. This is just $30 for one SNES controller, which I find to be a lot more tolerable. And similar to the NES controllers, we also get the unique sounds, and unique color scheme. And yeah, there pretty much isn't anything that feels as good as playing a Super Nintendo game without dying. But playing a Super Nintendo game with a Super Nintendo controller. Everything just feels perfect here. This is definitely a little more based on the SNES Classic version of the controller, which is very, very similar to the original, but I believe the texture on the face is a little bit different. It's a little more rough here, which I actually prefer. And the added battery and components here, much like the NES controller, makes this feel a lot more substantial. It feels heavier in the hands, which I like. I like having a heavy controller. And this is a great controller to have for 2D games on the Nintendo Switch. It's officially supported by the OS. The only major problem is no home button, which I understand they didn't want to add too much to the controller to make it like not a Super Nintendo controller. They have ZL and ZR here, and they have like the sync button, but that's it. At least the NES controller, when these are both connected, the D-pad acts as the home button. On the Super Nintendo controller, I don't really think anything acts as that. But it's only $30, which makes this pill a whole lot easier to swallow. I'm gonna choke. When N64 games were introduced for Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, yeah, we got the N64 controller, which is probably one of the most vital controllers to have, mainly because there are many N64 games that just you kind of need that N64 controller for the full experience, you know? Stuff like GoldenEye or even Super Mario 64 just feel right with the original N64 controller. And yeah, this feels like a much bigger deal to reproduce than NES or SNES controllers. This is like the first time Nintendo's fully remade this controller, and it feels great. I'm not sure if this is exactly how an N64 controller felt right out of the box, but certain things are definitely different. I think the D-pad is a little different here. And this stick is definitely different because, you know, it's not complete dog shit. But they removed this slot right here. It's just molded plastic now where you'd put stuff like the transfer pack or the rumble pack. Nothing goes in here right now, which makes sense. I mean, what would go in there? But thankfully with this one, they have the home button and capture button and a ZR button there, all right here. So you can use this as a pretty full function controller outside of the fact that there's not a second analog stick. You do have the C buttons, which might act as a second analog stick, but I'm not actually sure. Maybe these act as face buttons like Y and X. We'll see. But you have this connect, boom, there it is, appearing as it does. And yes. This is a little quirky. It's also weird to use an N64 controller where, like, you know, I'm using the stick to move all this, but then I'm like, oh wait, to get to my groups, I have to hit the L button. How many games on the N64 can you say you're using the stick and then also have to use the L button? Not a lot here. All right, let's see what this is all about. All right, and if I remember correctly, this is once again gonna have a bit of a color change and sound effect change. There it is. It is a really cute little addition they have here. But just going into something as simple as Mario 64 here. And yeah, this feels pretty much right at home. It's pretty surreal to be able to play this with a controller that is, by and large, a one-to-one replica of the original controller, but actually better in some ways. This D-pad feels like a good modern Nintendo D-pad. Not a modern Nintendo D-pad like on the Switch Pro controller, but like, damn, that feels nice. But here we have the odd one out, the Sega Genesis controller for Nintendo Switch Online. This was revealed right alongside the Nintendo 64 Nintendo Switch Online controller. And this one is strange. I mean, it is a Nintendo product. You can see on the back here, you know, you have Nintendo's logo and Sega's logo, and it also says Nintendo Company Limited right on the back here. I just find it a little weird that when you sync this, it doesn't have the same kind of flourishes that the other Nintendo Switch Online controllers have. As you can see here, it's just kind of noticed as like a typical Nintendo Switch Pro controller. Nothing fancy. So we also have a bit of like a cute little sound effect that plays. You know, that's the sound effect that plays when you go to like the special stage in the original Sonic the Hedgehog. But not much more than that, to be honest. And you do get unique sound effects going through the menu here. So, you know, I mean, like, it is a Nintendo Switch Online controller, But this one's a little weird, also considering that it's 50 whole goddamn dollars. Yeah, $50 for this. I don't understand that. It kind of goes right alongside like the Super Nintendo controller where, you know, that's $30. It's just so weird to compare Sega Genesis Online to Super Nintendo Online because, you know, like, it's like, why is the Sega Genesis one kind of in the premium bracket here? If anything, they should be the same. Super Nintendo's in the base Nintendo Switch Online package. It's $20 a year. Sega Genesis is only available via the expansion pack, and the controller is $50, while the Super Nintendo controller is $30. Well, thankfully, at least with the Sega Genesis controller, you do have a home and capture button at the very top here. You have the Sega Genesis mode button here, which classifies as a ZR press. But other than that, I mean, like, this is just a Sega Genesis controller, the original with 3 buttons. I do love this look. You know, this is the Sega Genesis controller I grew up with. Actually, the one I grew up with didn't have like the red buttons and the red arrows here. So I do like this a little better because it's a little fancy. But if you want like the 6-button Sega Genesis controller, there are other options out there. The company Retrobit did a collaboration with Sega a while back where they re-released a lot of certain like Sega Genesis game controller designs as Bluetooth controllers, USB controllers. So, you know, you have options to be able to play like with, you know, a bunch of different classic Sega controllers if you so please. But, you know, the Sega Genesis Nintendo Switch Online controller is very high quality. It feels like a genuine, like, hey, this is like a brand new original Sega Genesis controller through and through. But now, you know, with the luxury of being a wireless Nintendo Switch gamepad. But this is like the biggest ripoff of them all. $50. I mean, like, if I had to guess why it's so expensive, like maybe licensing fees? I don't know. Like, that's why the Sega Genesis stuff is in the $50 tier, because Nintendo has to work more with Sega, so, you know, there's a bigger cut out of the pie there, so I don't know. I mean, this is the one that I probably would recommend the least, unless you are just like a die-hard Sega Genesis nut. There are people that live and breathe this controller. I like this controller, but, you know, I definitely have, you know, better options available on Nintendo Switch, but this is definitely really damn cool, especially when we start to play modern games with the Nintendo Switch Online controllers. Yeah, this is like one of the coolest things about the Nintendo Switch Online controllers is the fact that, like, yeah, they are basically just controllers for the Nintendo Switch. They don't just work in their respective apps. You know, they work across the entire system. I'm controlling the Nintendo Switch menus here, which, you know, there is a bit of a problem here when it comes to, you know, the lack of buttons available. You know, and definitely as these controllers kind of went on, you know, with each new one, it feels like they kind of started introducing more and more features on the controllers to kind of rectify a lot of the limitations they had. But they're still not perfect. For example, like if I'm using the Sega Genesis controller here, you know, I can't really close the software. You know, now I could use the touchscreen here to do that, but if I'm playing on the TV, which I feel like you are more than likely going to be playing on the TV with these controllers, yeah, you just can't do it. But this and the N64 controller are at least leagues ahead of the SNES and NES gamepads because, you know, we at least have like a home button and a capture button. But look at this, man. I'm playing Sonic Mania with the Sega Genesis controller, and this feels pretty damn cool. These controllers will pretty much work anywhere that, you know, like they only need the buttons that you have available on here. And even then, you know, you can finagle your way into some games with certain controllers. You may not be able to do everything, but hey, I mean, you still have D-pads, you still have buttons, all of that, so you can control some of it. And also, the Nintendo Switch does offer button mapping in the settings, so, you know, you can potentially kind of work your way around some games not being initially compatible with, like, your NES controllers or SNES controllers. Look at me, man. I'm playing Smash Bros. Ultimate with an N64 controller. This is, oh, God. Okay, yeah, we can kind of do this. Also, the C buttons make it really easy to just do smash attacks with just boom, there you go. You know, I died, but still, you know, this is fairly playable. That's pretty cool. I'm trying to play dots and boxes with the N64 controller because I think it's kind of funny. But yeah, there's no X button here, so I just have to watch the whole ass tutorial. Yeah, check it out, man. I'm playing dots and boxes like a man. Honestly, I could do this all day. I think it's really fun and really cool to just see like, you know, how many of these games we can actually play with the old school controllers. But you kind of get the idea here. For the most part, you know, like these modern games weren't really designed with, you know, the OGs in mind. But you can get by in a lot of cases. And I think it's a very cute novelty a lot of the time. I do genuinely think for a lot of, you know, more 2D games, you know, kind of a lot more retro style games, it may be very beneficial to use like, you know, a Super Nintendo, NES, N64 controller, just because these D-pads are like far better than what you get on a Nintendo Switch Pro controller or on Joy-Con. Now, of course, like these controllers are a bit pricey. I would probably recommend more people get like an 8-bit DOE controller. A lot of those are like some of the best retro style but modern controllers you can possibly get. They have incredible D-pads, incredible build quality. They're annoying to sync sometimes for me, but you know what? That's probably me just being, you know, stupid. But I think at the end of the day, these are so damn cool that Nintendo has done this, and Nintendo Switch Online initially was like a huge disappointment. It's like, what the hell are we doing here? But as time has gone on, and with the introduction of more and more of these controllers, as expensive as they may be, I think it just shows that this isn't like how Virtual Console or whatever was back in the days of the 3DS and Wii U. Back with those, it kind of felt like Nintendo wanted to just do the bare minimum when it came to re-releasing their legacy software. You know, they didn't really want to go above and beyond. If a game had too much of a weird gimmick or something, like let's say Kirby Tilt and Tumble, even though the 3DS had a full gyroscope in it, they just didn't bother re-releasing that. They were like, why bother? It's too much work for just such a weird-ass little game there. Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo used the Super FX2 chip for some very wacky little effects, especially in like the Touch Fuzzy Get Dizzy level. And for the longest time, Nintendo just refused to re-release that one. They were like, it's too much work to emulate that. We're just gonna port the Game Boy Advance version of that game, you know? And they would do cool things here and there. Like I mentioned, you know, you had the Super Famicom controller for Japanese Club Nintendo fans. And eventually, with the release of the NES and SNES Classic Edition, you know, those controllers with those systems used nunchuck ports, so you could just plug those into Wii remotes, and thus you could actually play a bunch of Wii and Wii U games with NES and SNES controllers. But this stuff is leagues beyond what they were doing there. I mean, like, remember Super Smash Bros. For Wii U on the Wii U? You had the GameCube controller adapter for that, and that GameCube controller only worked in Smash Bros. Now, you have an N64 controller, and they just let you use it across everything on the Nintendo Switch. That is awesome. And the games Nintendo re-releases on Nintendo Switch Online, you know, like they do put out the original Yoshi's Island, the original Star Fox. They put out GoldenEye on N64. They worked with Microsoft to get all of Rare's old stuff across all of the Nintendo Switch Online apps. You can play Kirby Tilt and Tumble with motion controls on the Nintendo Switch. And with these controllers, you can get an incredibly authentic yet modern experience. With these being fully wireless, they're incredibly easy and simple to use, and in most cases, they make these games feel a lot more fun, you know? Like, playing these games with the controllers they were designed for, you know, there's nothing much else like it, you know? Like, it's nice to be able to use, like, modern controllers with these old games, but at the end of the day, like, playing Mario 64 with a Nintendo 64 controller just feels right. And for some reason, Connect 4 feels even fucking better.